Chakula itiende mtoro huyu, chakula itiende mtoro huyu, chakula itiende mtoro huyu, muriache chakula itiende mtoro huyu.
Ladies and gentlemen, to all those who are joining us from all over the world, I'm Jacob Mafume, the Secretary for Elections. I'm here to talk about elections. As you are aware, we've had an election, a general election. This is the first year anniversary of that election. A lot of things have happened. It was a disputed election. We won the election in terms of the presidential election. Our votes were stolen. The people's mandate was not taken into account. Yes, we had to go through certain processes. We went through a process of the election petition at the Constitutional Court. The decision did not come in the way that it should have been at the Constitutional Court. We have a right in terms of our Constitution to see differently from what the Constitutional Court decided. We can critique it, we can come up with a different view, and which we have done. The situation was that the election was already done, reforms had not been implemented. We were coming from the Mugabe era and we moved on to the Mnangagwa era, which was nicknamed the New Dispensation, but it continued with the same tactics. Rampant abuse of state resources, food, traditional leaders, media, a lack of independence of the ZEC, a lack of clear adjudication mechanisms of the elections, and so forth. All these issues were raised. Issues of the counting of the vote. It took them 3 to 4 days to count the vote for an election of 3 million voters. In other countries, they have more voters than we do, but they count the elections faster than we do. Since then, we have moved to the issues of by-election. The first question that will come to people's minds is, why are you participating when the reforms you are talking about have not been implemented? And the answer is very obvious. We are giving the system an opportunity to reform. As you will know, there were many observer missions that came into this country that dealt with the issue of the past election. The last election was not given a bill of health by the NDIRI observer mission. It was not given a clean bill of health by the Commonwealth observer mission. And they had specific issues that they pointed out that needed to be done. One, it was the issue of the independence of ZEC itself. ZEC is not completely independent in the sense that it is not operating without the interference of the state. ZEC is managed by the Minister of Justice, whereas it should be a committee that manages its own budget. It gets its budget through the Minister of Justice. It also, when it suggests laws, it doesn't go directly to Parliament with those laws. It has to go through the Minister of Justice. And you will note that the Minister of Justice is a key actor in elections for the ruling party. Now, when you have one of the parties being above ZEC in terms of the process flow of certain things, it clearly creates an impression and a view that ZEC is not completely independent. Even the invitation of observers, it is done by seeking permission from the state, and also in terms of the logistical operation of ZEC, there is a heavy involvement of the state. And then secondly, the appointment of the chairpersons and so forth are issues that have bedeviled the current ZEC, and particularly the appointment of the chief executive. We have been worried about the chief executive of ZEC, and currently they confirmed Etwell Slaigwana, who is not clear in terms of his status, whether he's a current serving military person or he has since retired. Then we have the perennial issues of the media. The media was attacking, and there is a judgment that came out of the High Court by Justice Mafume recently that condemned state media in terms of its coverage of the opposition. They had less coverage. The only time we were covered as an opposition was when we were being attacked. Our President Nelson Chamisa was not in the media, in the state media, and it behaved like the mouthpiece of one political party. And this was condemned by the observer missions and currently by the High Court. Then we have issues in relation to traditional leaders, and this has become acute in by-election. In Bikita, we had about 54 headmen of 54 villages. All these headmen were marshaled to central points. They were asked to then give directions to the villagers. You have food. This is a drought year. Food is being used as a weapon for votes. The weaponization of food aid. The government is not giving food freely. The food is being given on a partisan basis, rice, trinkets, and so forth. So this is the operating field that we are in, to name a few of the fundamental reforms that need to be done. Even the issue of funding. State funding has not come to us as the MDC, even though we had the number of seats, even though ZANU-PF has been given state funding. The issue of vehicles, they bought vehicles even for the losing MPs of ZANU-PF. They have parliamentary vehicles, and they have refused to get vehicles for the other legitimate MDC MPs. So we have a situation where the playing field is tilted against us. We have a situation where Dynamos and Caps are playing and the referee is wearing a Dynamos uniform. So one can't tell what is the play. So we are participating. Now our hope in participating, and which we will currently continue doing so, was that this participation will highlight the reforms that are needed, will bring to the fore the kind of election malpractices that occur. So let's take, for example, a case in point is Lupane, which received a lot of coverage. Lupane, the Minister of Defense, or the Deputy Minister of Defense, who is also the political commissar of ZANU-PF, wrote a letter to his counterpart that they needed medicines at St. Paul Hospital in Lupane, and that these medicines were critical for ZANU-PF to win that seat. And the Minister of Health responded, giving a positive affirmation to that call. We reported this matter to ZEC. ZEC said it is not its mandate to investigate, even though there was no need to investigate this issue because it was as clear as broad daylight what had occurred. We also reported the matter to ZAC. Up to now, we have not had an official statement as to what ZAC is going to do about it. Headmen were given money into their EcoCash accounts to campaign. They were made to bring villagers to the voting booth, and also food aid was used in a big way to try and convert the vote. The amount of resources that were put in terms of state resources, abuse of state institutions, that was highlighted by the letter, and that is also highlighted by the food handouts that are then given in terms of rice, in terms of so forth, and also the threats that come with the villagers voting against ZANU-PF. And they were told in no uncertain terms that should they vote MDC, they will starve. Should they vote MDC, they will starve. So it became very difficult for that to be called a proper operating environment. I mean, there are issues relating to the ballot paper. Where was the ballot paper printed? Did they print according to the law? They are not supposed to print more than 10%. Issues of the advertisement of the postal vote were not done. The proper training of the agents in terms of the law has not been done. The biometric voters roll has not been produced. It's only recently that they started putting the ballot paper outside the polling station, but this is not the biometric voters roll. It hasn't been put out. So the reforms had not been done. Media, our candidate never appeared on state media, which is critical in terms of radio in reaching far off places. There was no radio coverage of our candidate. There was no TV coverage of our candidate. The TV coverage was reserved for the ZANU-PF candidate. So these are the things that need to be reformed, and these are the things that we are highlighting by our participation in the by-election. Yes, we will win some. Indeed, after the election, we won a by-election in Chitungwiza, we won a by-election in Mutasa. But our winning does not make the by-election or the election environment free and fair and in compliance with the Constitution. So that's where we are having an issue, and that's where we keep on saying, let us reform, let us reform. Currently, Parliament is claiming that it is reforming, but it is not dealing with the priority bills. Currently, the Cabinet tried to push in the marriages bill. No one had called for the marriages bill. Certain aspects, yes, in our marriages, issues in terms of distribution of property need to be dealt with, in terms of the age of consent, in terms of marriage, need to be dealt with. But there was no need to rush. Now they are rushing certain legislation like MOPA, which is going to replace POSA. In many ways, and it's being discussed in Parliament right now, it is not the right form of reform. It will endanger freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and freedom of movement, and the ability of people to carry out democratic activities. So that is where we are. But we are encouraged by the voters that voted in Lupane and in many of the other by-elections. They do surmount a lot of odds. We reduced the ZANU-PF majority by over 250 something votes, and that is very difficult to do in a by-election contest. We maintained the number of voters that had voted in the general election in terms of the parliamentary election. Yes, in terms of the presidential election, we had won that seat, and so forth, and all the other parties dramatically lost their vote. So there was a level of commitment, but the rest of the vote that went against us was the dividend of electoral malpractices, was the dividend of the lack of reform in our elections. And we do hope that when we keep these things, when we keep participating, we are highlighting to the nation, we are highlighting to all stakeholders the need for reforms, because we cannot keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. The Electoral Act needs to be looked at in terms of the areas that I have covered. And elections do not need to be issues of sacrifice. They do not need to be issues where the population has to struggle to express its will. It is a fundamental right, and we should be able to participate, as the Constitution says, in a free and fair election. And we should be able to deal with the concerns of the observer missions as they've been highlighted by the observer missions that I've mentioned. And so we will keep participating. We have other by-elections that are coming up. We have a by-election in Zaka East, we have a by-election in Mangwe, we've got a by-election in Mashingo North, Ward 1, and we've got a by-election in Glenview. Now, what we want from those by-elections is a situation where ZEC has to amend its ways. Firstly, we have to depoliticize the Secretariat of ZEC, and the decision to confirm the acting secretary is a decision that runs counter to the desire of making ZEC independent. And he has to prove to the stakeholders that he is indeed independent, failure which we continue and persist with our call that we need a truly independent chief of staff at ZEC. As of now, he has not called any meeting with the stakeholders. We do not understand what is his understanding of his brief. What is he going to do differently? He has been part and parcel since 2008 of the election mechanism in Zimbabwe. And those elections have been highly disputed. Certain things have not been done properly. And every year, there seems to be regression and not improvement. And if there's any improvement, it is just small baby steps which do not make the election completely free and fair. That goes for ZEC itself. Its operations are not completely independent. As we saw in the past election, the results do not come as they arrive at the station. The results management system is still an old analog system that does not allow for efficient verification of the results and also an instant pinging of the results electronically at the center, which results can then automatically be added where everybody can see. We've seen the South African elections, American elections, and any other elections, even the Kenyan elections. The results are there and posted for all to see as they happen instantaneously and contemporaneously. So that is what we require from ZEC. And some of the reforms that ZEC has to do not require a change of laws. They don't require a change of laws to appoint an independent ZEC secretariat. They don't require a change of laws to deal with certain aspects of abuse of state institution. That is bribery, that is abuse of ministries of health, abuse of parastatals, and so forth. That is already in the law. It shouldn't happen. And we are saying, should they stamp down on those things, then it will go a long way. Then there are other reforms that require, of course, a change in the laws so that the laws are aligned to the Constitution, which calls for a democratic election and a free and fair election. And it also goes for the media. The media does not have to have a change of laws for it to reform. ZBC can hold debates of parliamentary candidates. It can profile all the parliamentary candidates. It can allow a measurable given time for each parliamentary candidate. And they are not doing that. The state papers are not doing that. And these, they don't belong to one party. They belong to all of us. The only coverage that seems to be balanced seems to come from the private media. Then, of course, other institutions like the police, like the CIO, and so forth, they have to refuse to be abused, have to be able to practice in a manner that covers everybody without them being used for partisan interests. And that is needed. The issues of traditional leaders, it's already in the Constitution. There's a High Court judgment against Chief Charumbira. And there's also that traditional leaders should not be used to intimidate people and so forth. So I will look at some of the questions that are coming in so that I can answer to them in terms of the specific things that people want. Okay, let me see. But those are the issues that I'm highlighting are the issues that we seem to be facing in terms of the elections and that we need to be remedied. We as a party, yes, we have some work to do, and that is the work we have to do, is the work to keep participating in elections, to highlight the reforms, to provide the alternatives. Our legislator in Parliament are doing that. There's a question on what Parliament is doing. Parliament is indeed engaged in some of these things. We have looked through our parliamentarians, the question time, we have called for the reform of the media. The Committee on Media, led by Honorable Prince Sibanda, has indeed visited ZBC and has looked at what ZBC needs to do to to provide a fair operating field. And ZBC has not responded as yet, but we've had engagement. We've made past motions in terms of what has to happen in elections, and these have not been dealt with, because, as you know, we don't control Parliament. The numbers in Parliament are skewed in favor of ZANU-PF, and as the current discussion in mind will be the current discussion on the Law and Order Maintenance Act, or the replacement of POSA, which is ironically called MOPA. We are going back to the colonial terminology. But this bill, they've suspended all the rules. It's going to be railroaded in Parliament, and because of the numbers, we are unable to stop it. But we should be entering into activities that allow our people to see that we have objected against this bill. And once it comes out, and if it comes out in the fashion that it threatens to come out, we should deal with it through the courts, give the courts an opportunity to deal with certain aspects of the acts we believe are unconstitutional and are not in line with the Constitution. So those are some of the questions that are coming in terms of what we have done to improve or to change, what we have done to change the operating environment in relation to elections. We believe that our participation gives democracy a chance. It gives all parties, if they are genuine about reforms, an ability to reform the electoral playing field. And we can reform in either, you can cause reform in one of either two ways. One of the ways is to simply say, look, we are no longer going to be participating should you continue not dealing with issues of reform. That is one way. One way is by participating and clearly articulating and showing where the system is failing, so that when we come to the general election, people will understand the point we have made, that these elections are not a reflection of the people's will. They are a reflection of a selectorate, and that is the few group of people who decide who is going to govern this country. And once they so decide, they then engineer the whole system to come up with that outcome. So in other words, our system of elections is unpredictable, but it is a predictable outcome. What should happen is that we should have a predictable system of election and an unpredictable outcome. We are not having that. We are having an election that is unpredictable. The rules change as you move, but the outcome is predictable. You can see it before it happens, and you are told that this is going to be the outcome, and indeed the whole system works to create that outcome. So we've got Zaka East, we've got Mangwe, we've got Mashingo North, Ward 1, we've got Glenview South, to be able to show the point that we are making. And at every by-election, we should be able to highlight the reforms that need to be done. So to expect a situation where one's hands are tied behind their back, expect overwhelming victories or certain majorities to be turned is problematic. But also change can only be achieved, and will certainly be achieved, by us participating in these processes and being able to show where these processes are falling short. In the rural areas, the issue of weaponization of food is a key issue, and it cannot be ignored, because it's a drought year, we have regular droughts, we have maybe one proper rain season every 5 years or 4 years, and the weaponization of food is problematic and creates a situation where the people are under siege. And also issues of intimidation and coercion. I mean, the presence of state agents sometimes is meant to intimidate. It is overwhelming. It is designed to create a situation where people feel that should they vote in a particular way, there will be retribution. So we were of the view that once the reforms have been put in place, once the constitution has been complied with in terms of the Electoral Act and the practices, then we will begin to have elections that will reflect the will of the people. And once we have elections like that, we will be in a position to concede the results of those particular elections. At the current moment, with the elections that we are having, it is very difficult to say and to endorse these elections as reflecting the will of the people. Yes, we are aware that there are certain things that the government has said it will do. We are aware that there is a cabinet implementation matrix. The problem with that approach of the cabinet implementation matrix, and it has put about 45 or 47 reforms that the government either agrees with or disagrees with, is that they are doing it as cabinet. And we all know that cabinet is made up of one political party. What needs to be done in terms of implementing electoral reforms is a situation where we have what happened in Kenya, where they created an interparliamentary committee to look at the reforms, and it was given a timeline to deal with those reforms that would align the Electoral Act to the Constitution. And that approach, which brings all the parties together, is an approach which will work, because people can then hone down on key issues that require to be amended in terms of our electoral framework. And that is not being done. An approach which says that only a cabinet can come up with the areas that need to be reformed is problematic. And they are picking and cherry picking from the ZEC recommendation, they are cherry picking from the Commonwealth representation, they are cherry picking from the IRI and NDI presentation. And we have got problems with that. And then they will come to Parliament and they say these are the reforms that are needed, and then they will use their numbers to railroad reforms that simply do not deal with the issues. Then the other problem we have is the issue of the election petitions. As you know, the adjudication mechanism of the election, if you have a problem with an election, you have to go to court. Now these courts are very slow. If you look at the judgment about the media, it has come 1 year late, when the media was doing its stuff in 2018. And this is a year after 2018. Then if you look at the election petition, especially Chegutu West, where Dexter Nduna lost, ZEC admitted that Dexter Nduna lost. He lost by 200 and something votes. But they miscounted at the election. Both ZEC and us agree that Nduna's votes were not enough to make him win the election. Yet he is in Parliament. Why is he in Parliament? He is in Parliament because the court system is not flexible enough to deal with such glaring areas where we have shown and proved that we have won. So if the courts cannot deal with such a situation where it's clear that we have won, and yet they continue with the parliamentarian who ought not to be in Parliament, then there's something wrong with the electoral court system. And that also needs to be reformed so that it deals with the substantive issues of people complaining. If one has a complaint, let it be dealt with on the merits. of the election. And it's dealt with on the merits, the votes are counted, and whoever has won fairly is allowed to win. Now, even those that do election malpractices, people who steal an election like this one where he knows that the votes are not his, others commit violence, others commit bribery, our system cannot deal with that. No one is punished, no one is disqualified because of all those electoral malpractices. Yet, when we say we need reforms, people say there are no reforms that are needed. But that clearly shows that we need reforms in terms of the punishment that goes with electoral malpractices. There must be a qualifying period. There must be qualifications, and there must be disqualification for those that are not, that would have been found to be in violation of electoral practices. But once we deal with the dispute resolution mechanisms, we should be able to have a situation where even if you have complaints, you are then able to be dealt with, your complaints are dealt with like in other countries, and the result that is fair and that reflects what is needed will be done. So what will we as the MDC be doing to deal with these issues is the other question that's coming through. What we will be doing, yes, we will continue to use the platforms that we have in terms of trying to get the reforms through. One of the platforms that we have is Parliament and the parliamentary committees. We will continue to push the case for reforms in Parliament. Yes, the numbers might not be there, but there is need for a record for posterity to show that we raised issues around the media, we raised issues around the independence of ZEC, we raised issues around the weaponization of food, we raised issues around the abuse of state institutions and the abuse of traditional leaders, and also discrimination in resource allocation. So Parliament will be used as a platform. Secondly, we will use the courts. One will question, if we are complaining about the courts, why are you using the courts? You must remember that people like Nelson Mandela, people like Morgan Richard Tsvangirai, people like all the other people that have fought democratic struggles, they've used the courts as it were, because that is where you can place on record for posterity, that is where you can articulate what is wrong. And if the courts come up with the damaging judgment or judgments that are not in line with international best practices, it is the courts themselves that bring themselves into disrepute, and it is them that will suffer in the long run in terms of the perception of the people. We will also use international advocacy, whereby there are these Commonwealth Observer missions, there are IRA missions, there's the SADC Observer mission, there's the South African Observer missions. Even though the SADC Observer mission is not giving us the full report, we will continue to use it as a platform, because the SADC has got guidelines on elections. The African Union has got principles on elections, and these principles are being used in all other countries, Malawi, Zambia, and so forth, and they have greatly improved their electoral management systems. So we will continue to call on the international community, on to the bodies that we have signed. Why do we talk about the international community? Our government voluntarily joined SADC. SADC has got principles on elections. Our government has voluntarily joined the African Union. The African Union has got rules on elections. Now, if you join the international community, you are bound to comply with those standards. So you cannot say, no, I'm a sovereign nation, therefore they should not talk to me. It is us as Zimbabwean who joined other nations and said we are going to operate using the same standards as these other countries. So once you agree to do that, you are then judged by those other countries. It is they that come and say, are you complying with the standards that we have for our citizens in every country? So it is perfectly legitimate for us to go to the international community to talk to them about Zimbabwean elections, because we as Zimbabwe have agreed to be bound by the principles on election. The other platform is, of course, the citizenship action, where the citizens will petition Parliament, put petitions on particular aspects. Also, citizens want to use issues like demonstrations to deal with election issues and so forth. Those are some of the things that we'll continue doing as a party. And then, of course, we are creating alternatives. We do have, you must remember that the current constitution which we have is a combination of the work that we have done as a party to make sure that our constitution is in line with international constitutions, and that is what we have done. What is now left is for the Electoral Act to be in compliance with the constitution, and to that end, as a party, we will produce alternative electoral acts, alternative electoral bills, alternative media laws, alternative traditional leaders bills. Now, these alternatives we do have, and these are the alternatives we will present to the people, we will present to the stockholders to show that these are the things that need to be done and how they need to be done, so that we don't keep talking from a situation where we are not proffering the correct alternatives, where we are not giving alternatives. And these will be made public and people will see them, and these will arise from the experiences that we are having from the by-elections that we are participating in terms of doing that. We are upbeat. There are certain issues and certain areas that we have looked at. There are certain practices that have been done in terms of elections, and we're going to improve in that aspect. We are going to hone down on the reforms that are needed to be done, and these will be made public. We will write to ZEC. We will fight ZEC in the courts. We will make sure that by the time we get to the next election, the agenda and the issues of reform will be clear to all, and there will be an audit in terms of the reforms that we'll be saying, and there will be an impact assessment as to how these reforms are affecting the elections as we stand and as of now. So we are in the process of learning through doing. Yes, one might argue that the last election should have given us enough lessons, but I think the point has to be made that we need reforms in our election. And the only way that point can be made as of now is by continued participation as mandated by our Congress and as being put in practice. And we will call upon the people, and we thank them for the resilience that they've shown, the support that they've given to the MDC, the support that they've given to our president. Our structures work under a lot of pressure. Supporting the MDC in the rural area means food being denied. Supporting the MDC in a rural area means being intimidated. Supporting the MDC in a rural area means using your own resources. And the people have shown a lot of resilience. We applaud the people of Lupane for maintaining our vote and even increasing it and reducing ZANU, the majority that ZANU-PF had just a few months ago. That reduction of the vote, despite the playing field being skewed, is a significant occurrence, and the realization by the people that ZANU-PF is no longer viable as an option in terms of governance. It can only get through elections by bribery, abuse of state institutions, throwing millions and millions of dollars into by-elections in terms of t-shirts, in terms of food, and all this money is being abused. And other people are saying that as MDC must do the same. MDC must bribe the electorate. MDC must intimidate the electorate. We cannot have a race to the bottom with ZANU-PF. We cannot have a situation where we imitate their bad electoral practices in order to prove a point that we can beat ZANU-PF. We've beaten ZANU-PF in 2008, we beat ZANU-PF in 2013, we beat ZANU-PF in 2018 by conducting a non-violent, morally sound campaign. And we are going to continue doing that. That is the essence of a peaceful democratic struggle, a peaceful democratic process which follows the path of Martin Luther, which follows the path of many other adherents of peace. There will be setbacks as we move, but our duty is to beat those setbacks. Our duty is not to become what we are trying to remove, but to work in such a way that we maintain the moral high ground. So we are not going to have a race to the bottom with ZANU-PF in the essence of bribery. We are going to highlight the abuse of these state institutions so that it be stopped, so that it happens as it happens in other countries just across the board in South Africa. Everybody de-rolls, they go back to their parties, they campaign on the party platform, and that enables those who would have lost to congratulate those who would have won, and vice versa. And everybody works together in harmony, and they continue to oppose each other, but in a way that builds the nation, in a way that brings accountability. And to highlight one of the issues, we've got a big debate on corruption. Our argument is that corruption emanates from the vote. Once you steal the vote, what stops you from stealing the money of the people? Once you allow people who have stolen the vote to be in parliament, like Dexter Nduna, to be in State House, like the current situation, what then stops people from stealing money? If they can steal votes, if people can steal from democracy, if people can steal from the people's will, what chance has got money that is in the reserve bank against such a people? And the problem of corruption, it begins with the vote. And once people are able to use the proceeds of corruption, now we are realizing that many of the MPs that went and campaigned on the ZANU-PF platform in Goromonzi, many of these MPs, even in the person who is destroying Zimbabwe cricket is a ZANU-PF MP. These are people who used money from state, this is the proceeds of corruption, to then bribe, cajole, and coerce the voter into voting for them. And these are the corrupt practices that we have to stop. People have to indicate where they are getting their campaign funding. People have to indicate how much money they are going to use on their campaigns. People have to indicate their sources of wealth before they campaign. And this happens in other democracies. Here we have a person who just comes and buys whole constituents using ill-begotten funds, and they are allowed to compete. And then the whole problem, the whole nation has a problem where monies continue to go missing. It is precisely because of an electoral system that allows the vote to be stolen. So, in conclusion, I would like to thank you for listening. I do hope that I have answered some of the questions that have been put here. I've answered them broadly without referring to individuals, but I want to thank you for watching, and I do hope that you have understood the direction that we are taking as a party, what we promise as a party, what I promise as the Secretary for Election, is that we will do everything in our power to defend the people's vote. We will do everything in our power to allow people to express themselves, even if it means that once you create a level playing field, we might be the victim of that level playing field. We have no problems losing a fair a free and fair election. We have problems winning an unfree and an unfair election. We know we can win, but what we think is that for this country to go forward, we need free and fair elections that are in compliance with the Constitution. We are going to participate in these by-elections, and we can assure you we will do our best to win the by-elections. And secondly, we will do our best to ensure that the election system is then reformed by our participation in the by-election. The mandate from my president, President Nelson Chamisa, is very clear that we have to come up with strategies that allow Zimbabweans to express themselves. Why do we vote? People do not vote for the sake of it. It goes to the root issues that affect us. Fuel prices, food, jobs, etc., etc. People want a democratic society, not simply because they just want it to be called a democratic society, but to allow themselves to advance economically, to have food on their table, to have education, to have health, to have money, to have fuel, and generally to be able to pursue happiness, to be happy in the land of their birth. And that happiness can only be guaranteed by free and fair election, where the voter has power to vote for those who can perform and not vote for those that cannot perform. So our call for election is a bread and butter issue. Our call for election, free and fair election, is at the core of the existence of Zimbabweans. And Zimbabweans deserve a better life. And the only way they can get a better life is by the election being free and fair. And everything that we are doing, every struggle that we are encountering, every setback in the by-election, every win in the by-election, and every vote we get in the by-election is towards attaining that goal of making Zimbabwe a better place. We need to be the change that delivers, and we are going to be the change that delivers. And we begin by delivering a free and fair election, a people's victory, and also then governing in a manner that allows people to live happily in the land of their birth.